Thank you, everyone, for coming. Good to see you all. We are, I think this is the 18th session, 17th or 18th session. Now I forgot. Well, for the record, we'll have to look it up, of Kohelet. And we're really approaching the end of the book, where we're going to hopefully finish chapter 10 today. And now we'll leave us 2 more chapters. And the theme is quite focused, at least in my opinion, of what we're going to be reading the middle of chapter 10 going forward. And interesting, with, as always, with everything going on in our world. I do think that reading this type of wisdom literature, or this is a rich ground for conversation, especially when we have a lot going on in our world. So let us begin, and maybe begin with a dedication to the Ukraine, to helping out the Ukraine in these challenging times. Okay. So we are, I believe, here, chapter 10, verse 6. And Alan, would you mind reading for us to the end of chapter 10?
I'd be honored. Folly was placed on lofty heights, while rich men sat in low estates. I have seen slaves on horseback and nobles walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it. He who breaches a stone fence will be bitten by a snake. He who quarries stones will be hurt by them. He who splits wood will be harmed by it. If the axe has become dull and he has not whetted the edge, he must exert more strength. Thus, the advantage of a skill depends on the exercise of prudence. If the snake bites because no spell was uttered, no advantage is gained by the trained charmer. A wise man's talk brings him favor, but a fool's lips are his undoing. His talk begins as silliness and ends as disastrous madness. Yet the fool talks and talks. A man cannot know what will happen. Who can tell him what the future holds? A fool's exertions tire him out, for he doesn't know how to get to a town. Alas for you, O land whose king is a lackey and whose ministers dine in the morning. Happy are you, O land whose king is a master and whose ministers dine at the proper time, with restraint, not with guzzling. Through slothfulness, the ceiling sags. Through lazy hands, the house caves in. They make a banquet for revelry, wine makes life merry, and money answers every need. Don't revile a king, even among your intimates. Don't revile a rich man, even in your bedchamber, for a bird of the air may carry the utterance, and a winged creature may report the word.
Thank you. Anyone have any reactions or thoughts just from reading that as we did?
Yeah, we're I think up a little bit on number 6.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand where it says the rich man sat in low estate and folly placed on lofty heights.
I mean, I think those 2 verses, that one and the next one, are verses that we may not like very much. But he's saying, he's in his mind, in Kohelet's mind, I mean, this is a simple reading. He's a wealthy guy and he's got status, and he's saying, well, the world doesn't always work like that. The world gets twisted where suddenly you have, you know, the fools who are up in the heights, though the word for heights is the same word as we ascribe for gods. Mimromim, right? But Mimromim, that's like in the heavens. So, you know, fools are placed up there while rich men are sitting down below, right? Rich men and then he says, I've seen slaves on horseback and nobles walking on the ground like slaves, which in his, you know, we may cheer that from where we're standing, you know, but in his mind, but I think one way to look at it without getting into why he is doesn't like as an obvious aristocrat or wealthy person or king having his status taken away from him is that we live in a world that sometimes feels very wrong, right? It feels off. You know, suddenly even in it's not, things feel twisted. They're not the way they should be. And that's a feeling that we get from the world because the world's a broken place, right? This is the basic, one of the basic ideas of Judaism, of the idea in Kabbalah of the brokenness of the Shvira of the world is being broken and we have to repair it. So, right, the fools are in high places while the rich men are in low estates, and slaves are on horseback while the nobles or the ministers or the princes, they're walking while the slaves are walking on the ground like slaves. Any thoughts?
So this
Go
is
ahead.
almost like a Purim story then.
Exactly. I was thinking about this. The whole world is upside down, and it is. You know, today is the first day of Adar, so Purim is 2 weeks away. So Purim can be on our minds. But the world's a crazy place. I think that maybe is the way we'd say it. And Purim's story makes that point too, right? For no reason, suddenly they want to kill off all the Jews, right? Why? Because of one king's madness who listens to a minister's jealousy and folly because Mordechai won't bow down to him, and he gets angry at the Jews and decides to kill all the Jews. And King Ahasuerus says, "Okay," without thinking about it. And that's kind of how the world works. You know, there's something about the world that's upside down. And you know, I would, even if we want to link it to what's happening right now, there are some reports, who knows, but the Putin his mind has been, maybe this is his plan all along, or that he's been losing it a little bit through COVID. He's been very, very isolated. And so you could have one person one leader who's not, who makes a rash decision and millions are impacted and the whole world is impacted. I mean, there's something about that there.
Isn't he also talking about kings, right? Like in verse 4, the wrath of the Lord flares up against you. Don't give up your post, for when the wrath abates, grave offenses are pardoned. Here is an evil. This is the line we didn't read. Here is an evil I've seen under the sun, as great as an error committed by a ruler. Line 5 into line 6. Folly was placed on lofty heights, while rich men sat in low estate. Like you were saying, there's this reversal. We would expect that smart people lead us, right? But that's not what happens. What happens is there are fools everywhere, right? Like they're dead flies everywhere. They're in the ointment, they're behind the screen, they're behind the sofa. Everywhere you're going to find dead flies that are going to corrupt, right? That are going to corrupt man's wisdom, right? To lead in a positive way. So what I'm saying here in the entire chapter, and I'm trying not to take the chapter as a whole because I understand that these chapter breaks are arbitrary, right? But what I'm saying, what we read is what Koheleth is saying is it doesn't matter whether you're a king, it doesn't matter whether you're a fool, you can be rich, you can be poor, it doesn't matter. None of it matters, because if you're a fool, this is what's going to happen. If you're a wise man, this is what's going to happen. Nevertheless, when he gets to the end and he's talking about, oh, the happy land has a king who's a master who knows what's going on, right? Who rules wisely. And alas for you, land where you've got a lazy king, because you can't do anything about either one. And he keeps setting up, but in this chapter in particular, it's about being a king. Why? I mean, we're not going to be kings. Well, yeah, we don't have kings anymore. Why does he keep coming back to kings? I guess it's because it's the government of the time. But, you know, he ends this by starts talking about folly, and then he ends with kings that, and says, you know, don't kick a king, even when you're, you know, with your friends. Don't talk bad about a rich man, even in private. What is this about? Why can't you talk bad about a king if they're not doing? Why can't you talk about a rich man who's messing up?
You know, it's interesting, as you were talking, I was thinking about it, how everything is fickle, right? Everything is hard to, everything is fickle. And he seems to be giving us a very, very narrow band of land to walk on. It's like, okay, what can we do? We can't do anything. You know, are we supposed to, you know, he's taking away from us. What can we do? We're not supposed to do this. We're, you know, king. It's great to be a king. You can't, but a king at the same time, a king can end up on the ground, you know, and the word for nobles is the same word as later as he uses for ministers, right? I mean, it's translated differently, but the same word, sarim. So it's kind of like the whole world. Maybe this is where it's Purim-esque, right? Everything is Purim-esque, right? The world is Purim-esque. It's just a big play. We all have our parts, but still better to be in a good play than a bad play, maybe. You know, the whole world is, but I hear what you're saying. As a whole, it seems to be talking a lot about rulers and the fickleness of rulers, which is a lot more relevant when you live in a monarchy than it is when you live in a democracy usually, because, you know, at least you can change your rulers. Well, if your ruler is a bad ruler, then you know, they've got absolute or near absolute power over you. So you better to be wise, be careful. I see part of what this whole chapter is saying is be careful, be very prudent how you live, because life is, you know, whether it's the snake or the rich person or the minister or the king, they're all out to get you. Okay.
And the last three verses
Yes.
don't talk about a king or a rich man. That just, to me, was, it always gets out.
What is?
That even if you say things in private, somebody often finds out, that you have to be careful even when you think it is a private space.
Well, the power of words and of gossip, which our tradition
Yes.
is really talking
Yes.
about, and how easily things get out when you didn't think they would get out, even if you told a small group, but suddenly it's. Do you know what Judy said? You know what Judy said, and suddenly it's everybody knows what Judy said. So maybe this is a sobering view of the world, or Nancy, what were you trying to get to? Can you get to it, or you still feel it's elusive?
What I'm trying to get to is that none of this matters. That's what I keep getting every chapter,
Okay.
every chapter. It doesn't matter whether you've got a good king. It doesn't matter whether you've got a bad king. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor or pious or blasphemous. Everything, we as human beings attach a certain amount of importance to our lives, and we want to live as if our lives mean something, right?
Yes.
Because we're human and we need that. But what this keeps saying over and over and over again is, no, your life really does have no more meaning than a king's or a snake's, for that matter. The unborn are the most blessed of all, because they were never, ever born, and they don't have to suffer the indignities of life. That's the message I keep getting chapter after chapter after chapter. And so I am here at the end of chapter 10, trying to figure out then, what does all of this mean? Does this mean that a life like Gandhi's means the same as a life like Hitler? Is that what this means? I'm grasping for meaning, and the deeper we get into this, I don't think there's meaning here that I can relate to at a human level. I think what I want to get out of this, it's not here. I want to be reassured that relationships are important, that human life has value, that the things we do and say and think matter.
Mhm.
But
We-
that's not what he's saying here. He's
We-
saying exactly the opposite.
That's right. He's saying he is saying the opposite. He's lumping everybody together. Everything is vanity. It doesn't matter. And you're all going to end up in the same place.
That's what he's saying.
And sometimes the slaves will be on horseback, and sometimes the nobles will be on the ground, and other times they'll be the opposite. And so I think it's really good. And as you were talking, I was thinking about a book we're reading for the men's club, in the men's club book club, Man in Search of Meaning, which is a very different approach to the same question, right? Man in Search of Meaning gives you what you're looking for at this moment from where you are, at least right now, which is, right? He said Viktor Frankl is in a concentration camp, and he says, despite I mean, life is a lottery in a concentration camp too, right? When you read that book, that's what keeps happening again and again. You never know who's going to pick for the incredibly hard labor that day, which might kill you. You never know who the guard is going to attack. And you never know when the guards are telling you, hey, do you want to go to this place, if it means they're taking you to, to the gas chambers, or if they're taking you to, I mean, life is completely, you have no control, and everybody's taken to starvation to their lowest. And so Viktor Frankl's response to that is, you have try and live a moral life even within all of it, right? And if you find meaning in it, then that's what allowed people to survive the camps. Those who did their best despite it all to help their fellow prisoners, or to, so that's how Viktor Frankl found meaning within, and that became his whole contribution to the field of psychology, logos therapy, right? That's what it's called, I think. That what gives, one of the things that can drive human beings is a search for meaning, right? For Freud, it was all about search for pleasure, and for Adler, it was all about social beings finding acceptance within the society, within their social groups. And he says, well, man's search for meaning is what is truly at the deepest level what drives humanity. So what is it? What is it for Kohelet? What is our search?
Well, Kohelet is saying essentially what Nancy is saying, what Bonnie was saying, that under the sun, there is no meaning. Okay, so get over it. There is no meaning here for us humans under the sun. Actually, the structure of this chapter is very interesting, because each of these verses is structured like a fourfold. There's a thing there, and there's this and this and this and this. And the under the sun part is the fourfold, essentially, the fourfold root of sufficient reason, the way we conduct our lives and try and make sense out of it, the way we structure things, the way we square things off. He's spinning this around for us so that we find that there is no meaning in this particular frame of reference. In this square that we're in, there is no meaning. So is he going to tell us what the alternative of that is? Is he going to tell us where he is sitting above the sun, obviously commenting on this? Do we get to feel that place that he's in? I don't know. I mean, maybe in the last chapter, he gives us more of a clue.
So it's an interesting development through these chapters. I mean, he's slowly giving us a few verses here and there where he says, well, spend time with the people you love, which could be also Viktor Frankl, which is a Viktor Frankl thought. Enjoy drink and eating, when you have the opportunity. But there does, we hope, also a deeper message, reaching more. And I think what I get, at least, from all of these strings of Proverbs, I mean, some scholars feel that some of these verses aren't, placed with the kind of absolute care or editing that we think they are, and then maybe they're a list of proverbs which Kohelet, whoever Kohelet is, gathered earlier in his life, and now he's just stringing them together for us as a kind of lesson in life. But maybe a part of the effect is like, okay, the world, this is the world, as David is saying, under the sun, but there are still some principles that can help us to live as best we can. So if we move forward from where we were just looking, we go to he who digs a pit will fall into it, he who breaches a stone will be bitten by a snake. The verb will can also be changed to may fall into it. He who breaches a stone can be bitten by a snake, meaning that, okay, we live in this world and it's a world of consequence, and we just can't, you don't live in the clouds. You live in the world of consequences. Whatever we do can have an unintended consequence, right? You're working on your stone fence, but there's a snake there, and you can be bitten by a snake. And that's just the world. So either we can be paralyzed by that and not do anything, or we can just go on and do our best and sharpen our axe so that we've got the best possible axe to deal with life as it is. Because, even if we're contemplating what's above the sun, you still have to deal with what is under the sun. You have to deal with it, unless you're a hermit living in a cave, you got to deal with what's under the sun. And better to have a sharp axe than be hurt by stones or by snakes. And be aware of the consequences of life in this world, because it has a real bite to it, right? It has a real...
The other thing too, each of these things is an experience. And it's possible what he's saying is that it doesn't matter what the experience is, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, it's an experience. There's something about having an experience here on the earth, being a human, which is probably worth something. And I'm not sure he's articulating exactly what that might be, but there are certain mythologies, for example, that the gods take human form in order to have experiences, okay? Because they don't have experiences in the eternity that they're sitting in. So they take human form, they take the form of birds, they take the form of trees, and they have different experiences. Doesn't matter what the experiences are, but they're real experiences. And I'm inclined to feel he may be driving in that direction. Any experience works.
Yeah. Go ahead, Morris.
I mean, it seems like basically what I think he's saying is that, whatever you do, there's risks involved with it. Mm-hmm. And, as he says in line 10, the advantage of a skill depends on the exercise of prudence. So I really think that's kind of the key lines, like no matter what you do in whatever field, you have to be prudent in your exercise of that particular skill.
So really interesting here. I think it's definitely the we seem to be going between two thoughts, which I think are very much present in Kohelet. One is the thought that nothing matters and everything is Purim, right? Everything is foolish, everything is frivolous. So if everything is Purim, then why not be the fool and why not be the king? Just enjoy yourself, have a big party, because we're all going to play different parts and we're all going to do it. And on some level, it's all a big illusion. And everything that happens under here is an experience, as David was saying. And we're going to have many experiences. Sometimes just life, right? Sometimes you're the fool and sometimes you're the king. And we all have those. Sometimes we end up, sometimes we are the fool and sometimes we are the king. And we have all those experiences. We wear all those masks. And on Purim, one of the reasons we wear a mask is to remind ourselves not to take it all too seriously, right? You're just gonna go through all of it. But that's one whole stream of thought that's being woven into it. And another stream of thought is like, okay, well, try and manage it all. There's a time for every experience, but try and manage the different experiences as best you can and be careful because, you want to be prudent because even, you may say, okay, I can be the fool today and it doesn't matter. But once you're bitten by the snake, it takes a very strong sense of detachment to say that doesn't matter that I was a fool who was bitten by a snake. Most of us are okay being the fool until we're bitten by a snake, and then we're not as happy about being the fool. So it's two. I don't think they're opposite. I think they both are giving us ways of thinking about being a person, a human being, conscious in this world and in the flow of life that we all experience. And you can hold on to both of those truths at the same time, perhaps. All of these are, by the way, these are very difficult verses, and it's hard. Some of them are especially the verse about the axe and others, hard to know exactly what they mean. But this translation is reflecting well other commentaries and reflections that I've seen too. Let's move forward, unless someone wants to say something else about the axe and the advantage of a skill and all of that. Let's move forward. So we have, if the snake bites because no spell was uttered, no advantage is gained by the trained charmer. Similar idea, right? If you're a snake, if you're a trained charmer, but you haven't said your spell, then what's the point of being a charmer? It's a call to action on some level, right? It's like if you have an axe, but you haven't sharpened your axe, you're not going to be in a good place to cut wood or to go into battle. Anybody else want to say anything about the snake bite? A lot of snake bites in the chapter.
Yeah.
Well, here there's a word play too, several word plays which are really interesting. Now, verse 11, which I think is probably why, and I'm thinking about it, why editors believe this line might have come from a different place. So if you im yishoch hanachash, so already you can sound the sound of yichosh, a sound to nachash, right? Sounds the same. Below lachash, right? Lachash is almost the same as nachash. Nachash is snake. Lachash is quiet. So if the snake bites without being quieted, and then it says, and there's no advantage is gained leba'al halashon, to the one who's the master of its tongue. I mean, it's the same. The wordplay and the sounds are as beautiful here in the Hebrew. Im yichosh hanachash below lachash, right? Even that sounds like it's the same sound. Ve'eni tron leval halashon. The second half has a little bit less of that wordplay.
So they're talking about the tongue of the snake and then the tongue of the trainer.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If the snake is silent, talking about the silence of the snake. So it's talking about a snake charmer, but it's. I mean, there's a lot of one of the ideas that seems to be coming back is the idea of talking out or not speaking out, of acting and not acting, of remaining silent and not remaining silent. That's the idea that keeps coming back, right? At the end of the chapter, we have it's better to remain silent, but here it's telling us to talk. The fool talks. I mean, it's playing with the same idea, but it's hard to, okay, what's the thread? What are you telling us? What are we, where does it all lead us? Because the snake charmer, he should talk, because his talking, again, in the East, the snake charmer uses a flute. I'm not sure what it was in these days in Israel, in ancient Israel, but right in India, they have snake charmers who play a flute, right? And the snake dances, kind of sways to the flute. And I mean, to some degree, maybe if we want to take this image further, a lot of this is about a snake biting. And we don't want the snake to bite us, right? That's the basic premise. And you can charm the snake. I mean, to be a snake charmer is a pretty amazing thing. You can stop the snake, and the snake has such a deep symbolism, right? You can stop the snake from biting you if you can charm it. So how do you charm the snake? Maybe this is one of the ideas of, well, snake could be the ruler who can, wipe us out. The snake can be, the unintended consequences of life. The snake can be everything in life. We don't want to be bitten by a snake. I think that's the one thing that we're clear of. So let's try and charm that snake. But how do we charm the snake? And that's one of the questions we're asking. One of them, verse 12, Divrei, a man's talk brings him favor, but fool's lips are his undoing. If you're being foolish, right? We live in the light. We can choose whether to be the fool or the wise man. If you're going to be the fool, and the snake might bite you, and or the ruler might, or other people. His talk begins as silliness and ends as disastrous madness. What do you make of that? Yet the fool talks and talks.
Sounds like Donald Trump. Lips are his undoing.
Madness. It's interesting that in Kohelet's mind, madness and foolishness is never far away. Human beings easily seem to fall into foolishness and madness. Again, it's the where do we find normality in Kohelet? There's not a lot of normal, is there? And I think that part of what you were getting to, Nancy, we live in a space that we feel is normal, but we're not finding much of it in Kohelet. Everything is extreme and everything is dangerous.
It's all extreme. There is the normal world that we inherit. It's not here. He's gone to extremes on all sides here, but this book does not seem to inhabit the world I'm living in. I mean, it's talking about what if it got super, super, super bad, or what if it got super, I mean, in order to set up situations of extremeness, right, to cover everything, but I don't see a middle here.
Well, he at times he seems to be advocating for a middle path or middle ground.
Through the extremes.
Through the extremes, right? Be prudent. I mean, there's a lot of be prudent in all of these, so that's a middle path. So he's saying life is extreme. Pick a middle path. That might be part of the wisdom of it. And I mean, this last week we could say that it's incredible how quickly life feels much more extreme than it did a week ago, right? Or 2 weeks ago, or however. Life suddenly, someone. Yesterday, I heard from someone at the synagogue who has, a teenage son who's 17, and his son asked him, do you think, Dad, that there might be conscription in America in the next 5 years? And he said, I don't know, maybe 50-50, which maybe is, depends how you skew it. But life is normal, but then it's not. So be prudent, keep your axe sharpened. I don't know. And madness is can come pretty out of nowhere, right? Foolishness can very easily lead to madness. I mean, the link between the two is, the president of Belarus, who's definitely dangerous, right? They call him the last dictator in Europe, but at times before then, not to bring too much politics, but he appeared to be, the whole situation it seemed to be a little foolish, a little comical. And I wouldn't say comical, because if you're living in Belarus, it wasn't. And the way he was coming down on his opposition, but suddenly Belarus is involved in geopolitical considerations that are affecting the whole world. And a dictator, King Ahasuerus is foolish until he's dangerous. I mean, King Ahasuerus is very dangerous, right? Power is dangerous in the hands of the foolish. And Ahasuerus is foolish, and very quickly his power can cause tremendous damage and tremendous suffering. And so that verse is very pertinent, especially in the hands of dictators and of rulers who have absolute power, and who maybe did not come to it through any kind of merit. And the fool talks and talks. I mean, better not to talk. Is that what he's saying? Or it's saying that even though the fool is digging him a hole, he keeps digging and digging his hole. So then we switch. A man cannot know what will happen. Who can tell him what the future holds? How does that connect?
Well, the contingency of everything, the unpredictability, the fact that things could be this or they could be that. And I think this is what he's saying there. The contingency of everything.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. He's just said, well, be careful, be wise, don't be a fool. But then he says, you still don't know what's going to happen, and you still don't know what the future is going to hold. So you might as well be wise, perhaps. But as we've seen, sometimes the fool's up on top. So on one hand, he's saying how foolish the fool is who keeps talking and becoming mad. On the other hand, he's saying the fool often ends up on top of the horse while the wise person is on the ground. So you still don't know. You can do your best, but in the end, at least if you're no fool, you'll know how to get home, right? To get to a town, right? The fool runs this way and runs that way and is trying to do too many things, but then he never gets to town.
I look at that verse, and to me, it can also be a warning, not just to the fool or the wise man, but to the person listening to them.
Hmm.
That, you may have a fool, you may have a wise man, they're both going to be saying things, and it's up to you to evaluate it, to think about what they're saying, and you decide how much value to put on whatever is being said by whoever is saying it.
I think about a saying that man plans and God laughs.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
kind of makes you think of that.
Exactly. Tomorrow is not promised. You can best laid plans could be laid to waste like that. You can plan, you can hope, but tomorrow's not promised. So good luck.
There's no normal, because it's always transitory. It's always changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Charles. Right, there's everything is always changing, right? That's the little Buddhism there. But right, everything is always changing, and as Jews, we've experienced so much destruction and rebirth, and we've experienced all those poles in very extreme ways. I mean, everything is being thrown at us in this chapter, every side of the coin, right? Which it's hard to know which side of the coin we're able to find firm footing on. A fool's exertion. So another thought that I had was a fool's exertion tire him out, for he doesn't know how to get to a town. A man cannot know what will happen. Who can tell him what the future holds? And the whole thing, and the fool talks and talks. So listen to your wise man, but also keep your axe sharpened, and listen to the wise man. Don't listen to the fool, but also be careful, because even if you listen to the wise man, it tells you to go and work on your wall. There might be a snake in your wall, and so everything, it's all you don't know. Alas for you, O land, whose king is a lackey. A lackey could be here it could be a na'ar, a young man or a young person. Maybe you got a young king because his father died young, or however he came to the throne, and whose ministers dine in the morning.
In other words, they start drinking
Mhm.
at 10 in the morning.
That's how I took it, yeah.
I think it's a little bit of I think that's the only way you can take it. There's one other way of maybe, but it does seem to be oi to you, whose king is a young, your leadership. If the country's leadership is not doing a good job, the whole country suffers. What can you do about it? Especially if you live in the place where your leader is a king or a dictator. Nothing you can do. Go to war, okay. And the ministers are dining in the morning or buying super yachts, and not serving the country as they should. On the other hand, happy are you, O land, whose king is a master. Yeah, it's interesting. They translate it as master, and whose ministers dine at the proper time, but really is who dine in might. That's the real translation. And now with guzzling. Anybody have a different translation for that verse 17?
Yes, I'm sorry I was so late. Computer axe was dull and I hadn't sharpened it. It says, the altar has your princes dine in the morning. You were saying that, I'm sorry, this is 17. Happy are you, whose king is a noble, and your princes dine in fit time, but you thought it was not to be read that way. Is that right? You have a different.
I guess it makes sense. I guess noble, son of mobile. The master, the translation master here, I wasn't sure where. But I guess master is the same thing as a noble, maybe. I'm not.
I took it as someone who's mastered his abilities and sort of knows what he's doing.
Because in the Hebrew is, right, avadim hayinu hayinu b'nei chorin, the same word. We're free. Ben chorin could be a free person, but could be a son, I guess, son of a. Let's see.
Mechom Mamre translates verse 17 as, happy are you, O land, when your king is a free man and your princes eat in due season in strength and not in drunkenness.
So one way to read it then was if the ruler is young, and it could be that he's not the true ruler, but there are people behind him controlling him, And so to have your king who's free and not somebody's lackey, I guess maybe that's why the master and lackey comes from, and whose ministers, and he's controlling his ministers. His ministers are not just lazy. They're doing their job.
There's a Yiddish word that I keep thinking about that he's talking about. I think the word is verkackt. And he's essentially what he's saying is that that everything we touch is verkackt. I mean, there's just no way out of this morass that we're in. And yet we laugh about it. And yet we have good times, and yet we can enjoy it too. So in spite of all of that, and in spite of the fact that you're going to die, or at least it's a very powerful rumor, and you've seen parents and other people die, so probably your turn will come. In spite of that, somehow we feel comfortable most of the time. We feel happy most of the time. We feel full of life most of the time. How is that possible? How is that possible with all of that information about the topsy-turvy contingency of the world, the verkacktness of the world, that we still feel hopeful most of the time? Where is that hopefulness coming from?
Well, to borrow your own metaphor, and I'm not sure if Kohelet would say that, but there's that part of us which comes from over the sun, right? There's that part of us which is eternal, and that part is the shallow breath. I mean, the shallow breath. We haven't spoken about the shallow breath much since the beginning. But if everything is a shallow breath, everything is both vanity, but also precious. And there's also, having gratitude for the preciousness of every breath we take, and of the good times we get to spend with the people we love. And Let's go on. We're almost there. End of a chapter. Through slothfulness, the ceiling sags. Through lazy hand, the house caves in. They make a banquet for revelry. Wine makes life merry, and money answers every need. Is that talking about the people before, or is that giving us a way to live?
Well, as I read it, I was having problems. So I looked at the art scroll, and they don't have a different translation, but they do have a comment that without money, you can't have celebrations. And in order to have money, you shouldn't be slothful and idle. You need to work hard. So that you can have the permitted joys of life.
And this is, Judaism is a very pragmatic religion. And the rabbi said, Im ein kemach ein Torah. If there's no flour, there's no Torah, right? If you don't have your parnasa, if you don't have some means, then you may choose a whole life of Torah, but you're going to have a lot of trouble if you don't have enough, parnasa to make it work. It does also say im ein Torah ein kemach. If you don't have any Torah, then your flour is going to be empty for you. Your parnasa, if you don't have the Torah, then the other side of life is going to be empty too. But right, you want to be, you want to be able to have banquets, right? You want to be able to celebrate with your family and friends. Thus, you want to be able to have that, and you need money to be able to do it. So, don't be lazy. And I mean, the laziness connects maybe also to the ministers who were, right, the ministers of the king who were getting up and drinking and feasting. And so the house caves in and the ceiling sags. And when the house caves in and the ceiling sags in the government, then you're in everybody's in real trouble. We know that. It affects everyone. So there is a whole stream here within these chapters when speaking about the king and the ministers, of how we're bonded together in a common bond by our government. And I mean, that holds true with a monarchy, but also with a democracy, right? You can't get away from your community, and you can't get away from your nation, where our fate is bound together. And so we have to be smart, and in their times, how you treat your rulers, in our times, how you pick your rulers. Okay, let's get to our last bit. Don't revile a king, even among your intimates. Don't revile a rich man, even in your bedchamber, for a bird of the air may carry the utterance, right? A bird of the air could carry the word, and a winged creature may report the word.
Is that an angel? Is he hinting at an angel there? Winged creature may report the word?
I mean, and what I'm not seeing it that way. I'm seeing it as in my mind, I have a paranoid king in my mind who's, be careful what you say.
Right. The walls have ears.
Walls have ears, and they're carrier pigeons who will carry the word to far away.
But why is the last line after a bird was specifically cited? And I presume that in the Hebrew there is a word there that means bird.
So,
But then why go to something more general that has wings, right?
Yeah, I mean, it could just be a poetic way of saying the same thing twice, which is kind of a common. But Alpha Shemaim is definitely a bird of the sky, right? A bird of the air. And Baal Knafaim is a little bit. You're right. Could be different things. And that which has wings, because Baal is like a master or a master of wings. So you're right. Here he does say angel. And that which has wings, the angel who escorts you, as the matter is stated, says Rashi, for he will command his angels on your behalf and according to his apparent meaning. You should worry about every person. Perhaps there are listeners who will tell the matter to others. So if we do want to interpret it in that way, I'm not sure, what the simple meaning is, but if you do want to interpret it that way, there's a lot going on that you might not see that could report the matter. Let's see if we have any. Anybody else have any other translations?
Now, again, in the art scroll, it says that among the non-Jewish kings or royalty, they would let birds fly and then try to divine a message from their flight and patterns and formations and things. So that's the kind of message that they may be referring to here.
That seems
that would
traditional
make
commentary pushing it a little bit.
That would make sense with the snake reference about, was it here?
Yeah.
Something about the snake. Was it the last chapter?
So, no, it was this chapter. Well, let's go back to the second. Ibn Ezra, he says, Uval Knafaim, the master of the wind. He's the same as the bird of the skies, that inyan kafur. The matter is repeated. So he's saying that the matter is repeated. It's the same. It's Ibn Ezra, who's a Spanish commentator and grammarian who he doesn't bring a lot of midrash, and he takes and he says, yeah, he's being poetic. He's repeating the matter. It's the bird of the air he's talking about twice, while Rashi is bringing in more of the midrashic meaning of it's the angel. We could try something else. Different part.
But still, it doesn't say don't revile a fool. It doesn't say don't revile a poor man. Don't revile your neighbor. It's only specifically talking about king and rich man, people who
Have
actually power. Yeah, the powerful people.
Well, it seems like as you were saying earlier, that part of the meaning that's been woven into this whole chapter, and even before this chapter, is be careful of power. We've been getting into that for a few chapters now, which is be careful of power, because power will strike back at you, and then maybe in our days, one way that I think every one of us can understand that more from different experiences in our life, the best way perhaps is in a job, right? If you have a boss, sometimes bosses, even people who are nice, good bosses, can exert their powers in ways that are shocking, or that will put, kind of just exert authority. So I think that the power is authority and power, going back to, I think it was last week, we talked about Samuel, right? The king, right? Once you give authority to a human being and power to a human being, that power is going to be corrupted on some level, and they can exert that power in ways that it's going to be detrimental to you. And so this is saying, they lived in a world where they were much more under the yoke of fickle power, but all of us have been under the yoke of fickle power at different times in our lives. I mean, I'm sure most of our kids would feel at different times that they were under our yoke of fickle power when we decide not to give them the extra chocolate or whatever it is. But in our minds, it's not that fickle. But power exerted against one can really harm one's life. So be careful. That's be prudent. I think I'm going to end here. As we live in our world, we're living in a world where power is being exerted in ways that are harmful to millions. And another bracha that the other countries who also have power are able to use their power to stand up to that power and to help bring peace to our world, and they return to the harmony that we at times live in which at least gives us some comfort, and maybe to all be grateful for the shallow breaths that we do have. And life is a shallow breath, but we can be grateful for we all have in our lives, comforts and the love and the peace that we enjoy in our own lives. See you next week.
Thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Thanks,
Have a good day.
everyone.
Everyone.
Bye.